My name is Frank Maddox. I'm 56 years old, and I found out my wife gave the keys to my parents' Brooklyn brownstone to her ex-husband while I was standing under fluorescent lights in Hong Kong, 12 time zones from home, staring at my phone like it had just betrayed me. The message came in at 2:14 a.m. local time. No warning, no soft landing. A photo, my front door, wide open. Tina's text followed a second later. Relax, I gave your keys to Darren. I remember the pause after reading that. Not the kind where you think, the kind where your body forgets what it's supposed to do next. My thumb hovered over the screen. The air in the terminal felt stale, like reheated noodles and jet fuel. Somewhere behind me, a floor buffer hummed across polished tile, steady and mindless. Darren, her ex. I stepped away from the boarding gate, leaned against a cold metal column, and read it again. Same words. Same photo. The old red brick. The black iron railing my father and I painted together one July back in '78 when I was 14 and thought I knew everything. The railing still had the same small dent near the bottom where Dad dropped the can. And now the door was open. I typed, erased, typed again. What do you mean you gave him my keys? 3 dots appeared, disappeared, came back. Frank, don't start. He's just helping with a few things. You're halfway around the world. That was Tina's way, calm, practical, like this was a scheduling mix-up, not a line crossed. I called her. She picked up on the 3rd ring. I could hear the TV in the background, some game show audience clapping on cue. Ice rattled in a glass. Frank, it's late, she said, or early, wherever you are. I'm in Hong Kong, I said. You know that. I know, that's why I handled it. Handled what? A sigh, the kind that already carries blame. The house. Darren offered to look at a few things. The wiring, the back door sticks. You've been putting it off. I closed my eyes. I could picture Darren perfectly. The confident slouch. The way he talked with his hands like everything was a sales pitch. A man who always knew a guy, always had a shortcut, and never finished a job without leaving something worse than he found it. You gave him my keys, I said slowly. Yes, she said, sharper now. Frank, it's not a big deal. It's just keys. Keys. I thought of my mother's voice, light but firm, telling me never to lend them out. A house remembers who comes in, she used to say. I didn't know if that was true, but standing there in a foreign airport, it felt close enough. I didn't give you permission, I said. You didn't say I couldn't. There it was, the space she always slipped through. I hung up before I said something I couldn't take back. My hand was shaking just a little. Enough that I noticed. Enough that it scared me. I sat down on one of those molded plastic chairs, bolted to the floor, and opened my email. Work messages stacked up. Blueprints, deadlines. None of it mattered. I scrolled past everything until I found the folder I hadn't meant to open tonight. Maddox Family Trust Final. I tapped it. The PDF loaded slowly over airport Wi-Fi, each page snapping into focus like it was making a point. My name. The address on Bergen Street. The words irrevocable trust printed clean and plain, the way important things usually are. 3 months earlier, I'd signed it in a small office back in Akron, Ohio, after a lunch that sat heavy in my stomach. I told myself it was just planning, just being smart at my age. Too many men I knew had lost homes, savings, whole legacies because they waited too long to protect them. I hadn't told Tina everything. Not because I was hiding money, not because I didn't love her. I just didn't want another argument that ended with silence and separate rooms. I wanted peace. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. The boarding announcement crackled overhead. My flight to Singapore was boarding in 20 minutes. I didn't move. Another message came in, this time from an unknown number. Hey Frank, Darren here. Appreciate you letting me get started. Place has great bones. Great bones. I could almost smell the dust. Old oak. Cheap paint. The wrong kind of hands on the wrong kind of memories. I stood up then. My knees felt stiff, older than they should have. Around me, travelers moved with purpose, rolling bags, checking watches, living their lives. I felt separate from all of it, like I was watching through thick glass. That brownstone wasn't just property. It was where my father showed me how to fix a leaky faucet with nothing but patience and a worn wrench. Where my mother baked apple pies every fall windows, fogged up radio humming low. Where my daughter Megan took her first steps on uneven floorboards that never quite lined up right. and now my wife had handed it over like it was spare change. I didn't know yet how far Darren had gone. I didn't know about the permits or the lies or the way this would end. All I knew was that something sacred had been treated casually, and that kind of thing has a way of demanding a response. I closed the file, stood a little straighter, and picked up my bag. By the time I walked toward the gate, one thought kept circling back, steady and unavoidable. I had trusted the wrong silence. I didn't sleep on the flight back to the hotel. Jet lag and anger don't cancel each other out, they take turns. Every time my eyes closed, I saw that photo again. The door open, the dark gap where safety used to be. Keys are funny things. People treat them like conveniences, metal and grooves. Something you toss on a counter without thinking. But when you grow up in a house that's been passed down, you learn early that keys are about permission, about trust. My father never handed ours to anyone outside the family. Not neighbors, not contractors. If work needed doing, he stood there and watched. Not because he was paranoid, because he respected what the house meant. By morning, I'd cooled just enough to think straight. I sat at the small desk in my hotel room, sunlight cutting through smog, and opened my laptop. I pulled up the trust documents again, slower this time, reading every line like I was checking my own pulse. The brownstone on Bergen Street wasn't mine anymore. Not really. It belonged to the Maddox Family Trust, irrevocable, clean locked in. My daughter Megan was the primary beneficiary. Tina's name wasn't on it. Darren's name sure as hell wasn't. Legally, Tina had no right to hand those keys to anyone. That fact settled over me like a weight. Relief mixed with something harder. Sadness, maybe, because it meant my marriage wasn't as protected as the house. I emailed my attorney back in Ohio, Bill Harper, a man who wore the same gray suits he'd worn for 20 years and never wasted words. Bill, I'm overseas, urgent. My wife gave access to the Bergen Street property to her ex. He's inside now. The reply came quicker than I expected. Frank, property's held by trust. She has no authority, but don't confront yet. Let's see what he's doing. That was Bill, calm, methodical, the opposite of how I felt. A few hours later, another message came in, this one from a Brooklyn number I didn't recognize. This is Elena from 412 next door. Just wanted to check you aware of the work happening. Dumpster showed up yesterday. Dumpster. I pictured the narrow street, the way sound carries between buildings. I could almost hear it, the thud of boards, the scrape of metal, the kind of noise that doesn't belong in a place built before the World War I. I called her. He's been here all day, she said. Brought 2 guys, no permits posted. I didn't want to be nosy, but it didn't feel right. Thank you, I said, and I meant it. After we hung up, I sat there longer than I should have, staring at nothing, letting the reality set in. Darren wasn't helping. He was moving in. I texted Tina again. Why is there a dumpster outside my parents' house? Her reply came with a delay this time. Darren said it was just temporary. Frank, please don't spiral. Spiral. Another word people use when they don't want to look at facts. I called her again. You didn't tell me he was doing construction, I said. He said it was cosmetic, she replied. Relax. You're acting like he's stealing the place. The irony of that almost made me laugh. I hung up and booked the flight home. 15 hours from Hong Kong to JFK. The soonest seat I could get. Middle row. Didn't care. As the confirmation email hit my inbox, another message slid in quietly underneath it. This one from the New York City Department of Buildings. Subject complaint received, unauthorized work address, 412 Bergen Street. I read it 3 times. Not relief, not panic, something colder. Unauthorized work meant someone had noticed, someone official. I forwarded it to Bill. This changes things, he wrote back. Do not engage directly yet. Not engaging went against every instinct I had. I wanted to call Darren and tell him to get out. I wanted to yell at Tina, ask her how she could be so careless with something she knew mattered to me. But Bill was right. At my age, I'd learned that acting fast and acting smart weren't the same thing. That night, lying fully dressed on top of hotel sheets that smelled faintly of bleach, I thought about Megan, about how she'd cried at my mother's funeral and asked if she could keep the old kitchen table someday, about how I promised her the house would always be safe. I wondered how I'd explain this to her, how I'd explain that I let the wrong person walk in because I didn't want another argument. Just before dawn, my phone buzzed again. A photo. This time it wasn't from Tina. It was Darren. A shot of the living room. Drop cloths on the floor. My father's old light fixture gone, wires hanging loose. Caption underneath will make it shine. I stared at that screen until my jaw tightened and my hands went still. In that moment, something shifted. Not rage, resolve. Keys weren't just about access. They were about who thought they belonged. And Darren clearly thought he did. The plane touched down at JFK just after noon, and the cold hit me the second I stepped outside. That sharp New York cold that smells like exhaust, wet pavement, and old concrete. It cut through the jet lag for a moment, enough to remind me where I was. Home, or what used to be. I didn't go to a hotel. I didn't stop for food. I grabbed a rideshare and watched the city slide past the window, block by block, my body moving on instinct, while my head lagged somewhere over the Pacific. When we turned onto Bergen Street, my stomach tightened. The dumpster was real, big, rusted, parked half-crooked in front of the brownstone like it belonged there. Plywood leaned against the stoop railing. A coil of extension cords snaked across the sidewalk. The house looked violated. There's no better word for it. I paid the driver and stood there for a second, my bag still on my shoulder, just looking. That railing, I could still see the drip mark from '78 if I bent close enough. My father never fixed it, said it reminded him that perfection was overrated. I climbed the stoop slowly and knocked. No answer. I knocked again, harder this time. The sound echoed inside, hollow and familiar. The door opened halfway. Darren stood there in work boots, in a hoodie, a grin already forming before he even saw my face. "Well, look who's back from China," he said. "Hong Kong," I replied, "and step aside." He didn't. "Relax, Frank," he said, leaning against the frame like this was a bar he owned. "Tina said you'd probably freak out a little." That word again. I pushed past him. The smell hit me immediately, sawdust, cheap paint, something chemical that didn't belong in a house that old. Drop cloths everywhere. My mother's side table shoved into a corner. The old light fixture was gone. "What the hell are you doing?" I asked. "Improving things," Darren said. "You'd be surprised what this place could be worth with the right updates." I turned to him. "You don't have permission to be here." He shrugged. "I've got Tina's okay." "That's not enough." Before he could respond, the front door opened again. Tina walked in carrying a coffee, like this was just another errand. "Frank," she said, eyes widening. "You're back already." I looked at her, really looked at her, and realized she'd already chosen her position. Neutral. Between us. Safer than standing next to me. "You knew he was doing this," I said. She glanced around, then back at me. "I knew he was fixing a few things. You're blowing this out of proportion." Out of proportion. I pulled out my phone and dialed the precinct. I didn't raise my voice, didn't threaten, just stated facts. "There's a man inside my inherited property without my consent," I said. "Yes, I'm on site." 20 minutes later, 2 officers stood in my living room listening, while Darren talked fast and confident. "She gave me permission," he said, gesturing at Tina. "I've been staying here temporarily." The officers looked at Tina. She hesitated, just for a second, then nodded. I told him he could help. That pause hurt more than the words. The officers exchanged a look. One of them turned to me. "Sir, this looks like a civil matter. If he was invited by someone with access." "She doesn't own the house," I said. "Do you have paperwork on you?" I didn't. It was in my bag. In my head, I'd pictured them escorting Darren out immediately. Reality doesn't work that way. "I can get it," I said. "Then do that," the officer replied. "For now, we can't remove him." They left. Darren smiled like he'd just won a round. Tina wouldn't meet my eyes. I stood there surrounded by noise and damage and strangers in a place that used to feel safe, and felt something sink deep in my chest. This was the low point. I knew it when it happened. Later, sitting alone on the stoop, I called my daughter. "Dad," Megan said, "you sound tired." "I'm in Brooklyn," I told her. A pause. "Is everything okay?" I looked at the door behind me, at the cords, the dumpster. "No," I said, "but it will be." She was quiet, then said softly, "Please don't let them change the kitchen." That did it. I ended the call, stood up, and walked away, not because I was done, but because I finally understood something. This wasn't going to be fixed with shouting. It was going to be fixed with patience. And paper. I didn't go back inside that night. I walked 3 blocks to a diner that hadn't changed since the '80s. Vinyl booths cracked mugs a bell that rang every time the door opened. I ordered coffee I didn't need and sat with my back to the wall watching steam curl up from the cup like it was trying to leave before I did. That's where I finally opened my bag and took out the documents. The trust papers were thick, heavier than they had any right to be. I smoothed them on the table, ignoring the curious glance from the waitress, and read them again. Slow, careful, like a man checking a map before stepping into bad weather. Irrevocable, sole authority vested in trustee, no implied permission by spouse. Plain language, no drama, just facts. I called Bill. I tried the police, I said. Didn't work. I figured, he replied. That's normal. Don't take it personal. I won't, I said, and for the first time I meant it. Here's what we do, Bill continued. We document everything. We let him keep talking, keep acting. Men like that always leave fingerprints. That night I slept on a friend's couch in Bay Ridge. Barely. Every creak sounded like a drill bit. Every passing siren made me think Darren was finally being escorted out. He wasn't. The next morning my phone buzzed with a message from Elena next door. He's got guys coming in and out. One of them said something about permits. That was all I needed. By noon, Bill had looped in a local property attorney, Marcia Klein, a woman with a voice like gravel and a reputation for patience. She didn't promise miracles. She promised process. We pull permits, she said. We check filings. We look at what he's claiming. It didn't take long. Darren had filed for temporary electrical work using outdated information. Not illegal on its face, but sloppy. Worse, he listed himself as an authorized agent. He wasn't. Then came the text. One of the contractors Darren brought in forwarded Marcia a message thread after learning the truth. Darren pitching the job like a sure thing, talking about my place and investors lining up. Investors. That word made my jaw tighten. Around mid-afternoon, Tina texted me. Why are inspectors asking questions? I stared at the screen, then typed back. Because someone is doing work they shouldn't be. She called immediately. You're going behind my back now, she demanded. I almost laughed. Almost. I'm protecting what isn't yours to give, I said. There was silence on the line. Then softer, frank. I didn't know. That was the hardest part. Wanting to believe her. Wanting to be done. But wanting doesn't change paper. By Friday we had enough. Not for a blow-up, but for a plan. Marcia found Darren had scheduled a small walkthrough for Saturday afternoon. Not a listing. Not official. Just enough people to feel important. Perfect, she said. I didn't sleep much that night, not from fear, from focus. Saturday came cold and bright. I stood across the street from the brownstone collar, turned up watching people arrive. Darren in a blazer now, smiling, holding court. Tina showed up too, nervous, hopeful. I waited. When the inspector arrived, clipboard under his arm, I stepped forward. Not angry, not loud, just ready. Because by then the trail was clear. And Darren had walked it himself. The thing about a public lie is that it only works until someone asks the wrong question. Darren had turned my parents' living room into a stage. Windows open, lights on, folding table by the wall with bottled water and a plate of store-bought cookies. He stood near the fireplace, now stripped down to bare brick, talking with his hands like he always did, voice loud enough to travel. Solid bones, he was saying. You can't buy this kind of structure anymore. They don't build them like this. I stood across the street for a moment, just watching. There were 9 people inside. 2 men in sport coats who looked like they'd Googled Brooklyn investment property on the drive over. A woman with a leather notebook, a realtor I vaguely recognized from a sign down the block, and Tina standing slightly apart, arms folded, trying to look confident. My chest tightened when I saw her there. Not because she was choosing Darren, because she still thought this could be smoothed over, fixed, that this was a misunderstanding that would disappear if everyone stayed polite. I waited until Darren laughed. That laugh carried out onto the stoop, confident, certain. Then I walked up the steps. No one noticed me at first. That's the advantage of not announcing yourself. I stood just inside the door and listened as Darren launched into numbers. With the right updates, you're looking at a strong return, he said. I've already lined up. That's interesting, I said. The room went quiet in a way that felt physical, like air being pulled out. Darren turned slowly. His smile froze halfway. Frank, he said, didn't expect you back so soon. I didn't expect an open house, I replied. A couple of the investors shifted. Someone cleared their throat. Darren recovered fast. He always did. Folks, this is Tina's husband. Frank. He's traditional. Takes a little time to come around. I didn't respond. I set my bag down on the old dining table, the one my mother refinished herself, and opened it. Paper has a sound, a soft shuffle that carries in a quiet room. I let it. Before you go any further, I said, calm enough to surprise myself, there are a few things you should all hear. Darren stepped toward me. Frank, not here. Here, I said, exactly here. The first document I handed over was the stop work order. Fresh, official, still crisp. This was issued yesterday by the Department of Buildings, I said. Unauthorized construction, effective immediately. The woman with the notebook leaned forward. One of the men frowned. Darren laughed. Too loud. That's nothing. Happens all the time. Not when the permits are filed under false authority, I said. I pulled out the next document. The property at 412 Bergen Street is held by an irrevocable family trust, I continued. My wife does not own it. She cannot grant access. And you, I looked at Darren, are not an authorized agent. Tina's face drained of color. Frank, she whispered. I didn't look at her. I couldn't. Not yet. The inspector chose that moment to step inside. Clipboard under his arm. He didn't say much. He didn't have to. Authority has its own weight. Is Darren Pike present, he asked. Darren's confidence finally cracked. Just a hairline fracture. Enough. This is a misunderstanding, Darren said. We can clear this up. The inspector nodded once. We will, outside. One of the investors backed toward the door. Another asked quietly, is this house actually for sale? I answered before Darren could. No. That single word landed harder than anything else I'd said. The room emptied quickly after that. People don't like being part of someone else's mess. They don't like standing in the middle when the ground starts to move. Darren was escorted out onto the stoop. Not in cuffs. Not yet. Just walked. Smaller somehow. The blazer didn't fit the same anymore. Tina stood there, eyes glossy, mouth open, like she wanted to say something that had nowhere to go. I finally turned to her. I didn't do this to embarrass you, I said. I did this to stop it. She nodded slowly. I didn't know, she said again. I believe you, I replied. And that was the truth. But belief doesn't erase damage. As the inspector taped the notice to the door, I felt something loosen in my chest. Not victory, not joy. Relief. The door closed with a solid click. For the first time since that photo in Hong Kong, it stayed that way. The house was quiet after everyone left. Not the empty kind of quiet, but the kind that settles in layers like dust after a storm. I stood alone in the front room, hands in my coat pockets, listening to it. The hum of the refrigerator, a car passing outside, the faint tick of old pipes adjusting to the cold. I walked through each room, slowly taking inventory of what was still mine to protect. The kitchen hurt the most. Darren hadn't gotten far, but far enough. Cabinet doors removed and stacked against the wall. The old linoleum scarred where someone dragged equipment across it. I knelt down and ran my hand over the floor, the same spot where Megan used to sit with her coloring books while my mother cooked dinner. I'm sorry, I said out loud to no one in particular. That evening, I changed the locks. Not in a dramatic way. No slamming doors, just the steady, deliberate work of a man putting things back in order. When the locksmith finished, he handed me the new keys. Heavy, solid. There you go, he said. Clean slate. I nodded. Feels that way. Tina came by the next day. She stood on the stoop for a long moment before knocking like she wasn't sure she had the right anymore. When I opened the door, she looked tired, smaller. I should have listened, she said. Yes, I replied, not cruel, just honest. We sat at the kitchen table, what was left of it, and talked like two adults who had finally run out of shortcuts. She admitted she wanted to believe Darren had changed, that she felt useless while I was overseas, wanted to fix something, prove she could handle things on her own. I told her the truth too, that I should have explained the trust clearly, that avoiding conflict doesn't prevent damage, it just delays it. Some marriages end with yelling, ours ended with clarity. We decided to separate quietly. No lawyers shouting across desks, no friends picking sides. Just an understanding that trust once cracked, that deeply doesn't seal the same way again. A week later, Megan flew in from Ohio. She stood in the doorway when she arrived, taking it all in. The damage, the smell of fresh locks and old wood. She smiled softly when she saw the railing still there. You kept it, she said. Of course, I replied. We spent the next few days fixing what Darren broke, together, painting over cheap primer with the color my father liked, deep, warm, forgiving. Reinstalling the light fixture, he took down the one that never quite hung straight, no matter how many times Dad tried. On the last night, Megan and I sat on the stoop with takeout cartons balanced on our knees. The streetlights buzzed on. Somewhere down the block, someone laughed. I'm glad you didn't lose it, she said. So am I. She looked at me. Most people would have. I thought about that. About the moment in Hong Kong when my hands shook. About how easy it would have been to shout, threaten, burn everything down. At my age, I said you learn that winning loud usually costs more than it's worth. Before she left, we walked through the house one last time. I showed her where the trust papers were stored, explained every line, no more silence, no more assumptions. When the door closed behind her, I stood alone again, keys in my hand. I slid one into the lock and turned it. Click. That sound meant something now. It meant boundaries, it meant legacy. It meant learning the difference between peace and avoidance. If you've ever been handed something precious by your parents, your family, your past, and felt it slipping through your fingers, you're not alone. Protecting what matters doesn't make you cold. It makes you responsible. If this story struck a chord, take a moment to reflect on what you're guarding and why. Share your thoughts if you're willing. And if you want to hear more stories like this, quiet victories, hard lessons, and the long road to setting things right, consider staying with me. Some doors are meant to stay closed.